for a government elected by the quiet Australians, the coalition needs to be careful not to take their support for granted, and today, I'm afraid they did. I covered the election campaign here on Sky night after night, and many of you joined me. Now, I don't remember much of a debate, indeed any debate at all, about Australia pursuing a new referendum to change our constitution in this term of Parliament to enshrine a special body for Indigenous Australians to advise the Parliament on laws relating to them and them alone. We're told today that $160 million has been put aside in the budget to get this referendum up. I don't remember that either. A new Indigenous Minister today, Ken Wyatt, outlined all of this in a speech to the National Press Club that felt like a bit of an ambush, I have to say. But when it comes to the detail, it actually didn't appear to be thought through. Yes to a referendum, not sure what the words should be, not really sure when, not really sure how it might work, not sure who might be on this new body, not even sure how or if it will be an elected body. As an Aboriginal man himself, the first in Cabinet, now you can hardly blame Ken Wyatt for wanting to make a mark on the portfolio. Everyone, white fella, black fella, we're all dismayed at ongoing Indigenous disadvantage. And why wouldn't Wyatt want to make a difference, and make a difference soon? But on the question of our constitution, I think I speak for the quiet Australians when I say that our constitution is our country's foundation document. It belongs to all of us, new arrivals as much to those of us who've been here a long time. And any change to it must work for all of us, not just some of us. Now, in principle, there's a valid argument for acknowledging the place of Indigenous people in the Constitution, and done well, and here I mean by an addition to the preamble and not a new rights clause. It could, as my former boss used to say, complete the Constitution rather than change it. But anything that ends up dividing Australians rather than helping to unite us is not worth doing, however well-intentioned the minister might be. What Ken Wyatt seems to be proposing is a constitutionally entrenched Indigenous voice, as recommended in the Uluru Statement from the Heart, prepared 2 years ago by a meeting of Indigenous leaders. Even former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull described this as a kind of third chamber of the Parliament and refused to take it forward. Now, Wyatt seems to have dusted this idea off, and he wants to bring it forward as what he calls under a consensus option in this term of Parliament. Indeed, he's going to spend millions of dollars over the next couple of years trying to promote this consensus, which is in reality deeply contentious. As he announced today, he will seek, and I quote, the Council of Indigenous Leaders on the best way forward. Well, that's great, Ken. What about the rest of us? Because it's our constitution too. Wasn't the fight against racism all about judging people, in Martin Luther King's immortal words, on the content of their character rather than colour of their skin? For the past 100 years or so, haven't we been all about trying to treat people the same? Didn't the famous US court case, Brown versus the Board of Education, overturn the pernicious doctrine of separate but equal? Wasn't our 1967 referendum, hailed then and since as a watershed for our country, wasn't that about treating Aboriginal people the same as everyone else, not differently? So why the hell would we want now to revert back to having two classes of a citizen? Indigenous people, who could vote twice, once for the Parliament, and then again for an Indigenous voice, and everyone else who could only vote once, and whose parliamentary representatives would be subject to second-guessing by an Indigenous advisory body. Why on earth would we, for the first time in many decades, want to legislate not for equality but for inequality? Want to legislate to divide Australians rather than to dissolve our differences? Right now in the federal parliament, we've got the Minister Ken Wyatt. There's also Labor's Pat Dodson, Linda Burney, Malarndirri McCarthy. Now, I'm sorry that Warren Mundine and Jacinta Price aren't there too. But these people are the Indigenous voice. They are the voice of the first Australians in our parliament, and they've been elected fair and square on the same basis that every other Australian is elected. This proposal for a constitutionally entrenched Indigenous voice is a seriously bad idea in so many ways. First, it should not entrench identity politics in the Constitution, because once you start, where do you stop? As it stands, for example, women, well, we're underrepresented in the parliament in percentage terms too, as are Indigenous people. Sure, why not have a women's voice in the Constitution? Second, you should not propose a constitutional change that's doomed to fail. This one will. I don't give it a snowball's chance in hell. And in the process, we reintroduce rancour and division into our national debate. And we set back real reconciliation for at least a decade, probably more. And third, you should not have constitutional change unless it's sponsored by the Prime Minister. And if there is ever to be change in this area, it will have to be led by a Prime Minister that the people trust, not to play political games with the Constitution. Once the government realises that any constitutional change to enshrine an Indigenous voice will fail because it divides Australians rather than unites us, some of them will want to just legislate it through the Parliament and avoid the people. Indeed, that's what the Minister seemed to intimate today. Well, I tell you what, this would be ATSIC Mark II. Does the Prime Minister, for the quiet Australians, really want that? Especially if it would only pass with Labor's support. The Prime Minister won't want to pour cold water all over his new minister's proposal, at least in public, but if Wyatt's ideas actually go much beyond today's speech at the National Press Club, there will be deep trouble for the Morrison government. And the quiet Australians, well, they won't be so quiet anymore.